In this video and in the next video, we will be taking a look at electrolytes. The electrolytes that are in our bodies aid in nerve excitability, endocrine secretion, membrane permeability, buffering body fluids, and controlling the movement of fluids between compartments. In this particular video, we will focus on their function in fluid balance. Electrolytes are defined as substances that, when dissolved in water, dissociate into charged ions. Or in other words, electrolytes are solutes that, when dissolved in a solvent, such as water, dissociate into charged ions that are either positive or negative. All right, so which micronutrients are electrolytes? I've categorized them based on their positive or negative charge. Cations are the ones that are going to be positively charged ions. These include sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. And then anions, these are the negatively charged ions, and these include chloride and phosphorus. The ones that we will be focusing on in this video are the ones highlighted in bold, so sodium, potassium, and chloride. These are macrominerals, so ones that we require in higher quantities compared to other minerals. And these are essential when it comes to fluid balance in our bodies. First, we're going to take a look at sodium and potassium. The role of sodium in the body includes the following: fluid balance, nerve impulse transmission, such as muscle contractions, and nutrient absorption and reabsorption. Nutrient absorption occurs in the small intestine, and nutrient reabsorption involves the kidneys, or is performed in the kidneys. Potassium has some similar roles in that potassium is also used in fluid balance. It's also part of nerve impulse transmissions, which we'll take a look at both of these in a few minutes. Potassium is also important for protein synthesis, energy metabolism, platelet function, and acid-base balance. Another term that we need to know is osmoregulation. This is the control of fluid balance and composition in the body. Cells control the movement of electrolytes, which in turn controls water movement. Osmosis refers to the movement of water from places of low concentration from high concentration. And this water requires ions in order for it to move from place to place. It's important to maintain electrolyte balance in order to ensure proper osmoregulation. So here we have the sodium-potassium pump. Osmoregulation at the cellular level is performed by the sodium-potassium pump located in the outer plasma membrane of cells. With the sodium-potassium pump, when it comes to moving sodium out of the cell, this requires active transport to move these molecules from high to low concentrations. Because energy is involved, it's an active process, this requires energy through ATP. Now, on the other hand, if sodium was moving from the extracellular environment into the intracellular environment or into the cell, this is considered a passive process. It does not require energy. In the sodium-potassium pump, it maintains fluid balance. Water follows sodium. So when fluid balance needs to be restored, 3 sodium ions plus 1 molecule of ATP moves out of the cell, and 2 potassium ions move in. Each sodium molecule is also followed by chloride, which we'll look at chloride in a few minutes, but it's followed by chloride in order to maintain charge neutrality. So sodium and potassium, they work together to maintain fluid balance. They also work together when it comes to nerve transmissions. You don't need to necessarily know this process, but what I'm trying to show is that the sodium-potassium pump also plays a role when it comes to nerve transmission. Um, at resting potential, or when a cell's at rest, the sodium potassium pump is working as normal. However, when things such as nerve cells needing to send transmissions or muscles needing to contract, these sodium pumps, they're going to become flooded with sodium, which then that creates excitability in the cell, and that's where the action potential occurs. And then in order to return back to normal, potassium slowly starts to move out of the cell, and then by doing this then we go back to the resting potential where there's that balance between the sodium and the potassium. Again, this isn't something you'll necessarily need to know for this class, but I am highlighting the fact that sodium and potassium, they do work together when it comes to several processes in our bodies. Sodium's also important when it comes to our overall fluid balance. There's a dynamic interplay of different body systems when it comes to maintaining fluids in the body. So let's say that homeostasis is disturbed, that there's not enough water in our blood. There's a few things that are going to happen. First, our osmoreceptors are going to be stimulated. There's a few steps, though, that are needed in order for these osmoreceptors in the brain to be stimulated. First, the kidneys, they are our filtration system in the body. They're going to detect the low blood volume levels, or the low blood water volumes. So when the kidneys detect this, renin, right here, which is an enzyme, that's going to be secreted by the kidneys. That renin then travels in the blood and binds to a protein and forms angiotensin. Angiotensin then travels to the hypothalamus, which is located in the brain, in order to stimulate the thirst mechanism in our body. So these osmoreceptors are stimulated, and then ADH is going to be released, and that's going to tell the body that we need to take in more fluids, and that we also need to retain our current fluid levels so that we're not losing it to urine, but that it's being returned to the blood. So angiotensin helps with communicating to the hypothalamus. It also communicates with the adrenal glands that are located in the kidneys. And this, going back, let's go back to our sodium potassium pump. So this is actually going to activate, the angiotensin is going to activate the sodium potassium pump in order to ensure this process that the sodium's moving out of the cells, in order then that the water follows the sodium and that we're able to get more water into our bloodstream. All right, so again, once we have this process in place where we're drinking more water and we're also retaining the water that we're having, there's going to be an increase in water, which then that's going to increase the volume within the blood, and then homeostasis will be restored or returned back to normal. All right, our last electrolyte that we have for fluid balance is chloride. Chloride also, in addition to fluid balance, also serves a role when it comes to fluid secretions. So think of things such as our pancreatic juices and our stomach acids. Chloride plays a role in things along those lines. It also helps with pH balance, and it's a component of stomach acid. So hydrochloric acid, that's found in our stomachs, and it's made up of chloride. Now, with fluid balance, simply, and I already stated this, its main role is to maintain charge neutrality. As we saw earlier, potassium and sodium, they are both cations, meaning that they are positive ions. Whereas chloride's an anion, or a negative ion. So because of its negativity, it's able to balance out between the the sodium and the potassium. So we have balance by having the chloride there. Now, let's take a look at a few considerations when it comes to electrolyte imbalance. How does electrolyte imbalance occur? There's a few things that might bring this about. One being improper hydration, which by improper hydration, we may be talking about imbalances caused by either dehydration, so not having enough water, or overhydration, so having too much water, which then dilutes those electrolytes. Exercise can also bring about electrolyte imbalances. Water and electrolytes are both lost from sweating and from breathing. So I think there's a common misconception that electrolyte imbalances only occur by excessive sweating. However, when we're breathing, we're also releasing water and electrolytes. So that's something to consider, especially if you're someone that doesn't sweat as much during intense physical activity. As a result of things such as improper hydration, intense exercise, vomit and diarrhea, these, again, we're losing both water and electrolytes. Bulimia goes along with vomiting because it's self-induced vomiting. We also have disorders and medications that can bring about electrolyte imbalances. So through these electrolyte imbalances, this may cause things such as hyponatremia, which hyponatremia commonly is caused from drinking too much water, thus diluting the sodium. And we also have hypokalemia. So when you see the word hypo, that means low. So when we hear hyponatremia or hypokalemia, that means low levels of, in the case of hyponatremia, low levels of sodium. Sodium's signified by Na on the periodic table. And hypokalemia then is low potassium, which potassium is signified by a K on the periodic table. These are some symptoms of electrolyte imbalances. Some of these relate more so to electrolytes I will take a look at in a different video, such as bone disorders. But because electrolytes play a role in fluid balance and also in nerve contraction and nerve communication, we'll see things such as nervous system disorders, confusion, irregular heartbeat. So when we go through the functions of electrolytes, we can see then that when there's imbalances, that symptoms related to things such as nerve impulses, those are going to be impacted. Muscle spasms, that's another one because of muscle contractions being controlled by electrolytes. As far as treatment's concerned, we want to make sure that we are staying hydrated, especially if we are engaging in intense exercise or if we've been experiencing vomiting or diarrhea, and also to make sure that we're consuming electrolytes. Now, consuming electrolytes, this can involve just consuming foods that have these electrolytes, which we'll look at in a second, or it might be to have a solution, such as maybe a sports drink. Again, we'll take a look at sports drinks in a second and see considerations when it comes to sports drinks. In extreme cases, we might need to use IV fluids or IV medications or other medications in order to restore balances. All right, so the last part of this video, we are going to be taking a look at the dietary reference intakes for sodium, potassium, and chloride, as well as some food sources for these electrolytes. Again, these are macro minerals, meaning that we are going to need these in higher quantities when compared to other micronutrients. So for instance, for adults, we're going to need 4.7 grams per day. This is very different from other micronutrients where we're going to see milligrams or even micrograms as the recommended amount. Potassium is found in a lot of different food sources. So we have nuts, wheat products, some meats, fish including tuna, halibut, cod, and trout. It's found in a lot of fruits and vegetables, so things such as cooked spinach and cooked broccoli, potatoes, oranges, bananas, etc. These are all great sources of potassium. And so, generally speaking, potassium or lack of potassium, hypokalemia, it's less likely going to be from inadequacies from our diets. Generally speaking, most people are able to get um, potassium needs through a well balanced diet. Here are the adequate intake levels for chloride. Again, we see this is measured in grams per day. Chloride is common in table salt, so most people are able to get their chloride needs simply from the salt that we consume in our diets. Sodium, we have both an adequate intake given and also a tolerable upper intake level given. The recommendation is approximately 1 teaspoon of salt per day, which, when you think about it, really isn't that much, considering that a lot of our food products, especially in the US, contain salt. For people with cardiovascular diseases, they're going to want to stick more with the adequate intake as opposed to the tolerable upper intake level. This is not going to be appropriate for someone with cardiovascular diseases. All right, so when we think of electrolytes, I think a common thing that we think of is sports drinks, those such as Powerade, Gatorade. However, when it comes to sports drinks, these are only recommended for exercise that is of high intensity, so it requires more energy. Think sports such as tennis, soccer, long distance running. Those would be high intensity sports. And ones that occur over long durations. Again, tennis matches, soccer matches, races, running races, or even bicycling. These generally occur over long periods of time. So in that case, we need to replenish our water and our salt and also our glucose, which glucose isn't necessarily a part of this lecture. However, glucose is added to these sports drinks because it's helpful when it comes to energy. Instead of using sports drinks, so let's say that you are someone that's maybe outside, you're getting a little sweaty, but it's not necessarily for a long period of time and you're not engaging in high intensity activity. Instead of having a sports drink, which is high in sodium, also has a lot of sugar, other things that you can do are simply drinking water, but also having a snack that's able to replenish those electrolyte needs. So maybe having a sports bar or having some fruit and some nuts, maybe nuts with a little bit of salt, not too much though, those are generally pretty salty. But this way we can not have all of the salt and the sugar that comes from sports drinks. Another suggestion is to cut your sports drinks. So in other words, have just a little bit of the sport drink, especially if you're someone that really goes to sports drinks because of the flavor. But maybe just have a little bit of the sports drink and add it to water. What I used to do when I played tennis in high school was I would fill half a water bottle with water and I would freeze that. And then I filled the other half with Gatorade. So that way I was getting those electrolytes I needed, since tennis is more of a high intensity sport and we were playing during a hotter season. But I also had a nice cold drink because the water froze and I was able to have a not as sweet, not as sugar-filled beverage that still replenished my needs. And that was also refreshing as well. I would be remiss if we did not talk about sodium as it relates to cardiovascular disease. So we'll take a few minutes to talk about the relationship between sodium and cardiovascular disease. Sodium can lead, or high sodium levels can lead to something known as hypertension, which is the more technical word for high blood pressure. When we talk about blood pressure, we're talking about the force with which blood pushes against the arterial walls or against our blood vessels. This can be harmful because over time, this pressure, if there's too much pressure, it's going to cause damage to the heart and to the blood vessels. We want to look for a blood pressure of 120 to 80. That's our ideal value. The top number, the 120, is our systolic pressure. So this is the highest pressure that's exerted upon our arteries. This is when our heart contracts or pushes out the blood. So that's when the heart is pushing out blood with the most force. Whereas diastolic pressure, this is when our heart is at rest. So this is the lowest pressure during the relaxation phase of the heart following a contraction. Hypertension then is defined as a blood pressure of 140/90. So again, we want to make sure that we are monitoring our blood pressure, just because having high blood pressure may indicate future problems with cardiovascular diseases. High blood pressure is known as the silent killer because we don't physically recognize that we have high blood pressure. It takes testing to recognize that. So that's why it's really important to make sure that we are getting our blood pressure checked regularly in order to ensure that we are taking appropriate measures in order to lower our blood pressure and to prevent cardiovascular diseases.